when I listened to folks like Lamar Wilson and some Black Bitcoiners talking about the liberation that it provides because it removes the middleman, it takes traditional banks out of and so now we don't have to jump through those hoops like I was telling you about earlier in order to qualify for Bitcoin. I can just go buy as many as I like, stack it up, invest it where I want to. And then I started looking worldwide and seeing what was happening in El Salvador and how folks are able to send money like the Lightning Network and not have to worry about the fees, remittance fees and all of that. I'm like, yes, that sounds like freedom. That's what I'm talking about, that you're able to just kind of take control of your own financial destiny and not have to worry about, the middleman on the back end. And so that was what attracted me to the potential of Bitcoin.
Welcome to the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast, where we explore the intersection of Bitcoin and progressive issues. I'm your host, Mark Stefani. My guest today is Reverend Wendy Hamilton, who is running for Congress for the District of Columbia. What would compel someone to run for a position that has no voting rights in Congress? What you will learn is that Reverend Wendy has a selfless desire to help people. Running for Congress is the natural progression of a career in service to others, and I know you will recognize this after my conversation with her. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy my interview with Reverend Wendy Hamilton. Reverend Wendy Hamilton, thank you so much for joining me on the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to chatting with you today.
Wonderful. Well, let's get right into it. You're a teacher, a chaplain at Georgetown, a church minister. You have served as the spiritual and cultural outreach director for Andrew Yang. And now you're running for Congress.
Yes.
I suspect the common thread through all those positions is the strong desire to help people.
Exactly right.
Where did that desire come from, and how do you maintain it during these hard times?
I really feel like it's always been who I am, even from childhood, but I would have to give much of the credit to my mother. God rest her soul. And she was just a phenomenal woman. She was my role model. She was my example. And she was forever helping people. She was forever opening the doors of our home, inviting other people in. She was always open. She was always inclusive, if you will. And so just watching her example sort of helped me develop into that type of individual and that type of human being, just striving to be like her.
Did she give you advice as to how to handle the hard times when you feel like you don't have hope and yet you were relied upon to give it?
Well, she always reminded me that you can't give from an empty cup. So
beautiful.
So whatever I was giving to other people, whatever I was endeavoring to do, she always reminded me to make sure that I replenished myself. And so while it can be fulfilling in one way to give to people and to give of yourself, you don't do it at the expense of yourself. So what I learned and took from that was always find places and have people around me who are pouring into me as I'm pouring out to other people. And that's what I continue to do even in these difficult times. And the other piece of advice I think that she gave me to navigate, not even just tough times, but tough people. I'll never forget being in the 4th grade. And I was going to Catholic school growing up. I was one of the only African-American children in the entire elementary school. My cousin was the other young African-American lady. This is the first time I ever encountered racism, if you will. The nun who was my teacher in 4th grade called me the N-word. And it was devastating. That was the first time I had, and it was kind of a situation where I raised my hand to answer a question. I was always talkative, so I always was raising my hand to answer a question, and she would never call on me. So I finally said to her one day, went up to the desk and I said, sister, I won't call her name, but sister, I always have my hand up. Why don't you call on me? She says, I don't call on you because niggers couldn't possibly know the answers to the questions that I'm asking. What do you do with that word? What do you do with that statement at 9 years old, at 10 years old? Do you, I didn't, I was in shock. That's the first time I'd encountered the word. That was the first time I knew about it, but that's the first time it was directed personally to me. I didn't want to cry in front of her. So I went back to my seat and I sat down. But it was near the end of the school day. At the end of the school day, I met my mother because she came to pick me up and she saw something was wrong on my face. And I told her what happened. I couldn't even get through the whole story before I saw the back end of her coat getting out of the car and going into the school to talk with the principal and have a meeting and all that. All of that was, was handled and taken care of. I was removed and put in a different classroom. But she looked me in the eye and she said, "Don't you let that define who you are or who you are going to be, because that is an ignorant person. And you're always going to run into people like that. But you have the choice on how to respond to those types of people. That's ignorance. And it has nothing to do with you." So that is something I've always carried with me.
That was incredibly powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want you to tell us a little bit about your experience with this as a spiritual and cultural outreach director for Andrew Yang. I'm sure you've encountered very similar situations during your time in that position as you just described.
The spiritual aspect of why I joined Andrew's campaign really too was around messaging and his platform of humanity first. I've always been someone, even if I was interested in a politician, it was based on what they stood for, not what they looked like, not where they were from, but I needed to be able to resonate with something that they were fighting for. So when I discovered Andrew Yang, it was very early. They call me OG Yang Gang, if you will, because I was on board in 2018. I read an article about Andrew Yang. He had just jumped into the presidential contest. He was early because he had to get himself out there and get known. But there was an article in the New York Times entitled "The Robots Are Coming." And it was talking about the threat of automation and how so many jobs were being automated away. And we weren't looking out for the people who had lost those jobs. And Trump came along, sort of spoke to those emotions. And that's part of what got him in as well. And so he started talking about universal basic income and how we needed to give people a lifeline. And that if people had money coming in to put in their hands, perhaps they would feel less hopeless and felt like they had more options. And all I could think about was my grandparents in Ohio when I was growing up, and how my grandmother worked in the shoe factory and my grandfather worked in the atomic plant. And those were great middle class, jobs back in the late 70s and early 80s. But when those jobs got automated away, when those jobs got shipped overseas, nothing comparable came in to replace them. And my entire town, collapsed in on itself economically. And there was nothing for them. If you didn't have the money to move away, if you didn't have the means to be able to relocate, to find work elsewhere, what did you do? So a lot of people, turn to, unfortunately, opioid and alcohol and different things, depression. And so my town still hasn't recovered. I go back home every now and again, maybe every other year to check in on folks, and it hasn't recovered. But when I heard Andrew talking about universal basic income, I thought, now, if my grandparents knew they had about $1,000 a month coming in during that time that they had the job loss, maybe they would have had a little more hope. Maybe they could have felt like, okay, maybe I can weather this storm. At least I know I've got something coming in. It can cover a few bills, maybe put some gas in my car to get me to some interviews, things like that. To me, that was like what I preach on Sundays. Looking out for the least of these, taking care of the poor and the widow, and making sure that all of humanity's needs are met. So it just made a spiritual connection for me, the messaging around universal basic income. And then I come to find out Martin Luther King had championed a universal basic income. He talked about it. Matter of fact, the night before he was assassinated, he was doing a speech on guaranteed minimum income and getting money into every American's hands. So for me, the spiritual connection to the Andrew Yang campaign was in the messaging, because it went right along with who I am as a person, taking care of others, reaching out to humanity, putting our humanity first. And it was just a natural fit.
As a chaplain at Georgetown and in your other ministry work, you were present to a lot of people's pain, a lot of people's suffering. What common threads have you seen among us with those experiences, and how have they shaped who you are?
Well, I tell you something, they have those types of experiences before the pandemic would have probably been categorized as, the most major traumatic types of situations we can find ourselves in. But fast forward to now, and I'm doing some of the same similar type of skill sets with people trying to manage their lives and the disruption that has come as a result of this pandemic. And it's similar to sitting with people in their trauma who have just been diagnosed with a terminal illness or have suddenly lost a loved one, God forbid, a child. I never thought, it's amazing to me the capacity that God has for us if we open up to it. That's just kind of from a spiritual perspective. If you had told me several years ago that I might be accompanying a parent to the operating room so that their child could donate their organs, I would have said, no, I don't know if I could do that. And yet, fast forward to my chaplain experience, because not only was I at Georgetown as a chaplain serving with the first year residents, and that's its own trauma when you're away from home. So we had a lot of students who were challenged mentally with, having to be away for the first time and, maybe thinking about taking their own lives. And so I had some of that. But I also worked as a hospital chaplain. So that's where the accompanying a parent to the operating room. I was a trauma chaplain in the emergency room and a labor and delivery chaplain on the floor. So I kind of got to see the cycle of life.
I know Andrew Yang has spoken to these common threads in his experience in touring the country, where he would experience these kind of fundamental emotions and needs common to us all that broke down the barriers that we put up to differentiate ourselves.
Correct.
As a chaplain in the hospital, you experience that. As a physician in the hospital, I see that.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think we can take that understanding through our own unique experiences, that suffering that we have seen,
Mm-hmm.
those common needs that we have seen, and allow others a foot in that door to better understand these common things that bring us together?
I think just by modeling that ourselves, at the end of the day, we can talk about it, we can preach about it, or we can be about it. And what we have seen, what you and I have, had the luxury, if you will, of seeing is how trauma, pain, sickness, it doesn't discriminate. It's subject to hit any one of us. And I think that's what, again, this pandemic has shown us. This didn't just hit the poor. This didn't just impact the rich. Everybody was susceptible. Everybody had to stay home for a year and a half. Everybody had to reevaluate their life priorities. I saw people online literally trying to say, I don't know how to be because I'm always going, I'm always working, I'm always, so people are thinking about their life priorities and trying to figure out like, well, what was I doing? What have I been doing? What has become important? Who have I become? And so because you and I have already sort of had a glimpse into these kinds of conversations and opportunities that families have when faced with trauma like that, I think we are in a much more valuable position to help lead others through that process.
Yes, that's beautifully said, and I would agree. As we move toward a discussion of your platform, was there a defining moment for you in your decision to run for Congress?
Really, it was the death of John Lewis and how I just felt in that moment. Well, it was during the time, too, that we didn't know if Trump was going to get reelected. There was just all this uncertainty. So I'm talking June 2020, June, July 2020. And I'm sitting around like, I don't think personally our country would survive another 4 years of the Trump administration. I just don't think we'll be able to make it. I won't be able to make it. Let me just, I'm doing the best I can, but I cannot continue to process the direction that we're going and how everything is upside down. I feel like we were on our way to the upside down, and So as I sat there and I prayed, and I've always been interested in social justice. I've always volunteered on campaigns and things like that. But I've also said, I want to do something. What can I do to help me feel as if I'm doing my part to push back on this direction that we're going? And so John Lewis died and C.T. Vivian died. So I'm seeing all these civil rights leaders transitioning, and I'm thinking, all of the work that they've done is being threatened and jeopardized right now. So what can I do to help save that? They're trying to take us back to 1965. What can I do? And the most effective way I felt like, given where I am now, in my life, in my purpose, in my life's work, and then even geographically, it made sense for me to run for Congress. Some people said, well, that, Wendy, why not city council? Why not mayor? Particularly here in DC, because I'm in Washington, DC, and the role that I want to run for, number one, it's a non-voting delegate role. We can certainly get into that. Number two, there's a 32-year incumbent in the seat. So, people are like, why are you doing that to yourself? Like, well, because number one, the decision is not about me. I go where I feel called and led to go, number one. And number two, I feel like you have to also pursue things that capitalize your strengths and recognize where your strengths aren't necessarily. So when you look at the mayoral role, when you look at the city council, those are more administrative, executive type stuff, managing budgets, managing large organizations, making sure the fire chief and the police chief aren't strangling each other at the budget meeting, things like that. That's not my thing. But when you look at Capitol Hill, when you look at Congress, when you look at representation, when you look at using your voice on behalf of those who feel voiceless, when you talk about using your voice to influence legislation, to write legislation, to be able to bring the needs and to amplify the concerns of the people to those in power, to speak truth to power, that felt like a more natural fit for me. And so that's what motivated me to move to Congress for a run.
One of the specific parts of your platform that really stand out is the desire for DC statehood.
Yes.
What have historically been the roadblocks for DC statehood?
Well, first, I think it's mostly been political, but also some educational, right? One of the things I'm learning in this conversation around statehood is that I had the benefit of, like I said, being born in a state. You live in a state. We know what it's like to have representation, have a governor, to have, state representatives and federal representatives. We know, we kind of take it for granted. We know that if there's an issue, we can go get that taken care of. We can write our legislators. And so we know what that's like. You come to DC and folks here have never had that experience. They've never had full representation. And so trying to talk to people about the benefits of it, you have a lot of explaining to do. Well, what is that? What's the importance? I have some people saying to me, Reverend Wendy, I hear statehood's a good thing for us and it's something we should pursue. And I'm like, absolutely. We are 700,000 tax-paying residents without representation. We deserve to have a voice. We don't need the federal government overseeing and telling us how to make decisions. We can stand up for ourselves. And they're like, yeah, Reverend Wendy, sis, boom, bye, rah, rah, rah. But how's statehood going to help me put groceries on my table? How's statehood going to help me put gas in my car to get me from point A to point B? Like, break it down for me so I can understand how statehood is going to make a tangible difference in my life. Now, that's where you have to sit down and talk to people and be able to explain that, because you want everybody on board. And so from an education standpoint, that's been some of the barriers, just getting the city itself fully engaged. Because the majority are, but when I was going to statehood visibility events all this summer, and we were able to get statehood through the House, the Senate, not so much, so two of the most obvious barriers right now are Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kirsten Sinema. But that's, but even before that, I was noticing at these statehood rallies that it was mostly activists. It was mostly nonprofits and agents, the people you would expect to be there, right? Which is fine because you want that. But I'm seeing the same people and we're going to different parts of the city. So I'm like, where are the people at? Where are the residents at? If we want to convince the government that we want something, like first and foremost, the government is not going to give it to us. They didn't give us, they're not going to sit back and say, well, you know what? We're not doing right by DC. Let's go ahead and just go. That's not how they did. We have to fight for it. We have to take to the street. We got to stand there and we collectively have to demand it. And so my goal in running for this office is to motivate and inspire the people to go and make the case for statehood, because in my mind, that's the way that we're going. They won't be able to deny us, when we're coming at them in numbers.
Sure, makes sense. Obviously, the legislative process is entirely reactionary. And so if there's not a demand there, you're not going to get what you want.
Exactly. So they'll let you get it through the House. And like I said, all due respect to Delegate Norton, she did get it through the House twice. But we always knew that it was like when the Republicans controlled the Senate, during the Trump administration, the first time we got it through the House, Mitch McConnell said it's dead on arrival. Don't even bother bringing the statehood bill to the Senate floor, because their thing is they don't want two more Democratic senators. They know Washington, D.C. trends blue, and that those 2 Senate seats that we would inherit would potentially be Democratic. But that's not the point, Mitch. The point is this is undemocratic. It's a human rights issue. We're denying representation to taxpaying citizens. Just because the city happens to be heavily Democratic is not a good enough excuse for you to deny it. Because trust and believe, if those were 2 Republican seats, DC would be the district. Well, the name will be the Douglas Commonwealth. We would have been that by the time you and I get off of this call. So for the political ends of it, it's a power thing. So we got it through the House once. Now we've gotten it through the House again this time. And the thought was, we got Democratic president, we got the House, we got the Senate. Surely voting rights and the whole Democratic agenda ought to be able to just float through. Nope. Because we've got people that have different interests. So even if you are in the Democratic Party, we've got some who are not signing on to voting rights, not signing on to the infrastructure bill. And so really the only sort of solution I see there is just you got to vote some folks out, because I don't think they have an interest right now in changing their positions or tunes on it.
On your website, you have the statistic DC high school graduation racial gap increased by 85% between 2017 and 2018, and that the high school dropout rates are among the highest in the nation. I'm curious to know why that happened and what policies you were hoping to implement to address that.
So I honestly, in looking at that data, it is striking and it is shocking. And we're having lots of conversations around what is going on, particularly with the education system here in DC. And what we're noticing is that kids are taking less and less of an interest once they get to high school. And so for me, someone who on my day job works in DC public schools, I work at a local middle school as a truancy and attendance counselor. So I literally work on this issue directly with families to find out what are some of the obstacles and barriers to your child coming to school on a regular basis, and how do we keep them consistent so that they don't become a statistic by next year, because 9th grade tends to be the time where we had the highest dropout. And what happens too is there's less of a sense of connection. If you think about school, kindergarten, you're, through 5th grade, you're pretty much monitored, one classroom, small classroom. In the middle school setting, you still are kind of cocooned, right? I mean, you move around to different classes, but it's not this big experience. You've got teachers, you've got support systems there that you can rely on. So you still feel a little bit of this buffer, right? High school is like, all right, kids, you're on your own. Find your way to class, get yourself up in the morning, get to school, take care of yourself. You have to, it can be a shock emotionally, socially to students to now have to take on that level of responsibility. It can feel overwhelming. But also, I don't necessarily believe, and I have seen the data plays out, not all kids are necessarily interested or want to pursue college per se. They want to be stimulated in other ways. And so one of the policies that I am promoting the most is to return vocational and trade training into our high schools, apprenticeship, cosmetology, just skill sets where I feel like there are some students who become intimidated by academia, but they have a gift and they're hands-on. I work with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders at the middle school where I'm at. And we took our 8th grade group. I chaperoned to a high school visit. This has been a few years ago. And I remember one of my more unruly young men, God rest his soul, because he unfortunately became a victim of gun violence at 15 years old. But I remember Dennis, and I remember he was not interested in math, reading. He'd go to class, but was he really there? Sometimes not. He was just bored, uninterested. We would go on this high school tour. And at this particular high school, there was a local gentleman who used to own a shoe repair shop. And he had closed the shop, but he reopened it in the basement of this high school and started offering it as a course elective to teach kids how to resole shoes and, restring and all of that. And I remember, out of all of the things that we walked around and looked at in the classroom that day, that's the one thing that caught Dennis's attention. And Dennis wandered into the shop, sat down, talked to the gentleman, wanted to know about it. And I thought, wow. Now, we can't seem to reach him any other way, but look at this, because kids also need something that they can feel successful at, right? And so when I saw just that little bit of a spark in his eye, I never forgot that. And I said, this is what we need more of. We need more options. We need to recognize that our kids are completely overstimulated. They've got a lot of things going on. So we need to give them options and other ways that they can feel successful and feel like they have the potential to succeed. And that's when I think we'll see these numbers begin to go down.
One of the main tenets of your platform is economic justice.
Correct.
What does economic justice mean to you?
It means leveling the playing field. It means removing the systemic barriers of discrimination, of racism, of exploitation, of means testing that tend to keep people in poverty, that tend to leave too many people on the outside of being able to sustain themselves, to live not even just above their means, but to even live at their means. There just seems to be such a gap between the haves and the have-nots, and particularly when it comes to people of color. So I want to see the barriers removed. I want to everybody to start at the same starting place and be given the same opportunities and not have to worry about having to jump over several hurdles in your lane while someone else has a clear, straight path to what they define as success for themselves.
Can you describe further those barriers that you experience in your own life, but lives of friends or family that you've encountered as well?
Well, like for instance, I can talk about myself. I haven't always, and I'm still living, in my means, but I was a single mother at one point, trying to make it with my daughter. And I had to go to the government to get assistance, and they would make me have to qualify. You have to lay everything out. Well, what do you need and how much do you make and how much are you saving and how much are you paying for this and how much are you paying for that? And if you're paying $2 more than they want you to, oh, I'm sorry, then we're cutting off your entire benefits. You're not. And it's just like, you can't make anybody feel any more smaller than that. Like all I'm asking for, I'm not asking for this a handout. I'm not asking for this to just be given to me. I'm saying that my life is in a situation right now where I need support, and you're making me jump through even more hoops just to qualify for minimal support. And then if I go too far beyond what you think I should be doing, then you're going to remove all of that support and put me back at square zero. That to me is a barrier. It's not okay. It's inhumane. And until we remove those types of barriers where we just take folks at face value and do what we can to help them live, recognizing that, we're all at different places in our economic lives, I don't see, how we can achieve full range economic justice.
You had mentioned Martin Luther King's speech prior to his assassination and the importance that he put on savings, Black banking, financial freedom in the Black community. Booker T. Washington also said the same with regard to savings, having a bank account, owning your house, and what that means for finding your full potential and acquiring one's full rights.
Yep.
Do you see economic justice as that foundational level by which one can find their full potential, to find their freedom? Is it that foundational?
It is a large portion of the foundation. Now, I don't want to put so much stock in a financial foundation that it doesn't necessarily suggest that we also need an emotional and spiritual foundation, I think, to experience true liberation, right? But because we see people with what we think are very stable financial foundations, but they aren't necessarily thriving in other areas of their life. But for the way we've set up our system and our society, our capitalist society, universal basic income, for instance, is, Andrew Yang used to say, it's capitalism that doesn't start at zero. So if we want everybody to participate in the system the way we set it up, then we need to give people the means and the opportunity to participate in said system. You can't say this is how you can achieve a level of freedom, of liberation, but we're going to deny you every direction that you try to take in order to do that. You say, get a home. A home leads to you feeling of having your own place. Yes, but you're appraising the homes of African-American owners way lower than you are of white owners. You know what I'm saying? So what are you saying then? So who then is defining the American dream, if you will, and who truly can participate in it if there's all that? It's almost like you can't offer someone unconditional love, but then list several conditions for them to be able to achieve it. So you cannot offer freedom, but then place 15 qualifications and criteria in place for you to experience that freedom.
With regard to economic justice, let's move to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Why is Bitcoin a force for economic justice that you don't believe can be found elsewhere?
So for me, and I'm still learning about Bitcoin, I'm still learning about crypto. So let's just, I want to be, full disclosure on that. I decided early on in my campaign that I wanted to understand and explore different types of financial tools and opportunities, particularly for people of color, to have access to. And this was right around the time when Bitcoin was big in the news. There was, about a year ago when all the coins and Doge and all, everybody was talking about crypto. And I was like, what are they talking about? And one of the members of my team, he had helped me with some digital stuff, but he had also helped Andrew with his digital platform when he was running for president. So that's how we connected. Andrew happened to also be one of the only presidential campaigns that accepted cryptocurrency and Bitcoin as a campaign donation. Him and I think it was Eric Swalwell, out of the 24 candidates or so that were running, they were the only two. So that's where I kind of got introduced to the concept, right? So I'm trying to understand what it is. And my staff member, as I mentioned, that joined my team said, Wendy, I think it's time for the political community and the crypto community to start having conversations. They need each other. They're not mutually exclusive. And as Bitcoin in particular, because it seems to be the more prominent coin, it seems to be the more accessible coin right now, and the one that I see showing up in a lot of Black and brown spaces, I thought, okay, well, why is this popping up? Because I want to understand so that I can help educate more people. And so when I listened to folks like Lamar Wilson and some Black Bitcoiners talking about the liberation that it provides because it removes the middleman, it takes traditional banks out of the, and so now we don't have to jump through those hoops like I was telling you about earlier in order to qualify for Bitcoin. I can just go buy as many as I like, stack it up, invest it where I want to. And then I started looking worldwide and seeing what was happening in El Salvador and how folks are able to send money like the Lightning Network and not have to worry about the fees, remittance fees and all of that. I'm like, yes, that sounds like freedom. That's what I'm talking about, that you're able to just kind of take control of your own financial destiny and not have to worry about the middleman on the back end. And so that was what attracted me to the potential of Bitcoin. And so I started digging in more because I said, that sounds like economic justice tool to me. It's not the tool. It is definitely a tool for me. But I also want to explore, again, all of the crypto. We had a conversation. We were pro crypto campaign early, first out of the gate. It made sense to me because I didn't want it to just be, I'm jumping on the crypto Bitcoin fad so I can get some quick donations. That was not what my intent was. I was like, if I'm going to embrace this, I need to have to be able to connect it to policy. And so that made sense to me in the economic justice lens. We brought it into the campaign, and that's why we have been such strong supporters of it since that time.
Because again, it removes that component of, do you qualify for economic justice?
Exactly. Right. Because we know, you and I know, I sense that that the undercurrent of do you qualify is, are you worthy?
Right.
And so that's how it can become interpreted. Not only do you not qualify, you don't qualify is because we don't believe you're worthy to achieve this particular level of financial freedom. We need you dependent. You are the type of person who we feel like doesn't deserve to have this opportunity to thrive because, we've given you opportunities. I mean, yeah, we threw a few thousand obstacles in your way, but we gave you the same opportunities. You can do the same thing, everyone, and you've chosen not to. And that is not the case. And then I looked at what's happening in Nigeria. Nigeria is freaking out because one thing I know about the powerful is they get nervous when the people start gaining power. And the banks here and around the world are like, oh, ban it, hurry up. No, you can't give people, put that, because then they're going to think they're more powerful than we are, or that they don't need us and that they can go around us and, God forbid, if they have that level of freedom. So that was impressive to see how it's lifting people out of poverty around the world as well. So United States, we're still, I wish we were more proactive when it comes to innovation and technology and things like Bitcoin. You can't, we tend to fear what we don't know. And so I wanted to get out ahead of this because I'd like to think that I'm open. I'd like to be forward thinking. I believe the future, Bitcoin is here. It's not coming. It's not a concept. It is here and it is moving like that. And I don't want us to be on the back end trying to catch up with it and all that it has to offer because we don't fully understand it. Well, you know what? Get understanding that there's plenty of opportunities talking to folks like you, getting out there and learning what's coming. That's why I'm open and I let people know that that's the kind of leader and the type of representative I want to be in Congress. I want to be open. I want to be proactive, not reactive to this. And so it's been a great experience. It's been a great learning experience. Like I said, I'm still learning, but I know that I'm on to something here. I know that I'm on to something and I'm just grateful to get and gain all the information that I can.
We're grateful that you're here too. What concerns have you received from some of your voters in DC about Bitcoin?
It's a scam. What is it again? How is it going to work? It's a Ponzi scheme. One of my opponent's supporters said, oh, do you think embracing cryptocurrency and embracing Bitcoin is going to help you beat, the incumbent, yeah, good luck with that. Like, why? What's bothering you about learning more about new innovation, right? So that you reacting like that says more about you than it does about me.
100%.
Don't be upset about me trying to educate myself about where we're going because you want to stay where you are.
Right.
My incumbent hasn't even entertained the idea of thinking about cryptocurrency. So, but the biggest barrier, like I said, of course, is education. Now, when we decided to become a pro crypto campaign, we started looking for, well, where are the Bitcoin groups, the meetups and stuff happening in DC so we can go and let people know. And it's just that we couldn't find hardly any. Not like you can find in California and on the West Coast and things like that. There just wasn't yet this appetite for it. But I'm still seeing Bitcoin ATMs popping up in Black communities, in the grocery store and in the corner carry out and stuff like that. And so how are you going to put these things up here and not come in and educate the community so that they can at least know what these are? They start buying Bitcoin thinking, and not even talking about the fees that those machines, charge, but that's a whole nother conversation. So I think some of the pushback has been more of folks just need to understand it better. So I've been partnering with a couple of folks, Naja Roberts, the crypto coach out in California, Black woman, very powerful. She's going to come in and do some education with the community with me. And, just been reaching out and just trying to educate myself, like I said, so that I can kind of bring down some of those barriers. I don't get upset when people push back on it or they don't understand it, because I get it. It can be scary. But at the same time, we have to be informed. This is the information age. By the time folks get comfortable about talking about it, we'll be on to the next thing. I mean, folks are on their way to Web3 in the metaverse, and you're still trying to block Bitcoin. Like Elizabeth Warren, what are you really doing? I'm telling you, it's all money laundering and setups. And I'm like, baby, listen, just go. I appreciate that. But, each generation has its own wisdom, and the wisdom and the experience from which you're operating, if you be so humble to admit, is a little bit outdated. That's the nicest way I can say that. And the world has changed a lot. And I need you to get on board with where we're going, not where we were.
You're an ordained minister. You obtained graduate training in clinical pastoral education. So I'd actually like to get your thoughts on the Christian view of money. Mm-hmm. Do you see a relationship between Jesus's view of money, mammon, or a corrupt currency, quote unquote, in our current monetary and fiscal policies?
I see it from the standpoint of, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And where your heart is, there your treasure will be. And so money for me is a heart issue. So it really isn't the tangible tool itself. It's what's in your heart. And what's in your heart gets demonstrated in where you invest your treasure. Does that make sense? Or what you do with it. Mm-hmm. And so while we can do a lot of things to legislate money and regulate money, it's not going to change someone's heart. We need to get to the deeper issue of why people, particularly our politicians and systems and corporations, are using money to suppress, are using money to harm, are using money to like when Jesus came and flipped the money changers' tables over. He's like, y'all in here trying to desecrate a sacred space. Now, I'm just going to tell you, I'm a real pastor, if you will. Like I'm not a thee, thou, though. I'm like, look, Jesus, here's what we got to do, with this situation. And so I interpret scripture the way I would think that Jesus was talking back in the day, right? If it were modern day. Like, you all in here trying to take advantage of the people. Y'all trying to make a quick buck. We're trying to change people's hearts and lives. And y'all are making a mockery of it. Get these tables, get your money, and go. And so that's why part of why I'm running is I believe we need a moral renaissance in government. It's not enough to just say, money is corrupt and they're taking it and using it for bad. But where is the motivation to do that coming from? Mm-hmm. We need to look at and sort of address both, because money doesn't necessarily make someone corrupt. Money shows you more of who you really are. Some people think, well, if I make a lot of money, if I win the lottery or whatever, I'm going to give it to charity. Okay, we'll see. We'll see. What really happens is the more money you have, it gives you an opportunity to demonstrate who you really are.
In the Bible, sin was referred to as debt, and the debt that Jesus criticized. Should we be viewing debt, and specifically debt that individuals and governments cannot repay, as sinful? Or do you think this harkens back to what you referred to as where it's coming from the heart?
Yeah, because I think sin has a more broad definition. Sin is a debt, but sin is also missing the mark. That's another way that sin is described. And so when you miss the mark, you can use money and miss the mark in terms of your soul and your spirit. And so money can provide a tool for you to be able to miss the mark, which is, to have the heart of God and to serve and to take care of others and make sure that. So I wouldn't necessarily label it as sin, but is it an avenue? Is it a tool and a way for ones to act in a way that misses the mark and the original divine intention of what you have been given to do and assigned to do with that money? Because if you look at the money itself, it's not about the amount. It's not about. Money is simply a tool, but it's also a demonstration of character and of who you truly are. We can learn a lot about the type of person you are looking at where you invest your treasure. It tells me more about your heart.
My last question for you, Reverend Wendy, is what gives you hope?
The resilience I see in everyday people just out here trying to make it from one day to the next. There's not a day that goes by that someone couldn't look around them, look at their situation, look at their circumstances and say, you know what, I give up. It's never going to turn around. It's never going to get better. I'm always going to be struggling. I'm always going to be living paycheck to paycheck. I'm always going to be stressed. I'm always going to be struggling. I'm always going to be surviving, never thriving. But then to see that person have a glimmer of hope come in their eye, if they've been granted a job, or they'll come back and they'll say, oh my God, Reverend, that situation I thought that wasn't going to work out, it actually works, and it's like, see, there is hope. You have to find hope wherever you can and hold on to it. I just had my first grandchild, Miles. He was born during the pandemic back in 2020. I couldn't even go to the hospital with my daughter at the time because they were limiting, who could go in. So she and her fiance were in there, and I was like, pacing outside, like, I can't go in. Why can't I go in? But after he was born and just looking at him and deciding that this life, this world is worth saving. It's worth being in. It's worth, because he's coming in with a blank slate. He doesn't know, what's going on. He's, looking at us with that sort of unbridled hope, love, joy, like just, what's all the potential that he could have in his life. And I want to preserve that, So even when I'm not necessarily feeling my most hopeful, one look at him and it restores my joy. He repowers my battery. He gives me hope that there is a possibility for life to go on, for situations to turn around. And then looking back over my life as well, Mark, I can just think about times where I didn't think me and my daughter were going to make it. We were homeless for a moment, living in a hotel, and I just did not believe, wasn't sure how things were going to improve at that time. And my daughter, who I love dearly, even in those days, said, no, Mama, we're going to make it. This is just temporary. We're going to be okay. She's 10 years old, 12 years old, it's going to be all right. You're a fighter. I know, and she would cheer me on when I couldn't cheer myself on. So it's moments like that. And I think those moments happen for us as opportunities to reflect back on where we've come from, to know that we could have given up then and we didn't.
Well, congratulations, Grandma.
Thank you. I go by Gigi though. I said, Grandma sounds a little too old and I'm a little too young and fly for that. So we're going to call me Gigi.
I like that. We've got a Gigi in my family too.
Okay.
You are an incredible hope dealer. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Please tell our listeners where they can find you and how they can support your campaign.
Please check me out at revwendyforcongress.com. That is my website, and you can find out all the wonderful information about our platform and where we've been and what we've been doing. You can follow me on all social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram at Rev Wendy for Congress, and Twitter at Rev Wendy 3. And they even got me dancing on TikTok, Mark. So you can find me on on TikTok at Rev Wendy for Congress. All of those platforms you are also able to donate on. I am proud to say that you can donate in crypto, in Bitcoin. You can donate on the Lightning Network, as well as BitPay. So we take fiat and we take Bitcoin. So please feel free to donate and give to our campaign. But I really just appreciate you, Mark, for giving me this opportunity to speak to your audience, to have this chat with you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine, Reverend Wendy.
Thank you.